All right, well, President Obama is going to host a fiscal responsibility summit at the White House today. The president plans to roll out his budget proposals Thursdays, but we expect to hear some highlights from that plan. In today's summit, Mr. Obama's blueprint is to cut an estimated $1.3 trillion deficit. It could be as high as $2 trillion. For more on the budget, Mark Bloomfield is CEO of American Council for Capital Formation. Jerry Seib is executive from Washington, the executive Washington editor, I should say, from the Wall Street Journal. Good morning, gentlemen. Thanks for being here. All right, Jerry, first of all, let me start with you. President Obama has a very busy week ahead of him. He is scheduled to meet with the Financial Summit, a group of people today, and then lay out his plans for the budget deficit. What can he do? What can he announce that's even realistically objective in this current climate?
Well, it's hard to be very hard about things like the budget deficit right now because a lot of these numbers are so much in flux, and a lot of them are frankly funny numbers until this situation settles out, until you know, for example, if there's going to be another stimulus a year from now, and until you know if there's going to be a TARP 3, which a lot of people think is likely. It's kind of hard to take any of these projections seriously. So I think what President Obama is about this week is sending signals, making some moves both at the summit and when he releases his budget plan on Thursday that say to Congress and to the American people, we're still taking deficits seriously. We can't tell you exactly what the projection line is going to be like, but we're going to do some things like try to inject pay-go rules, which say if your spending goes up, you either have to increase revenues or cut spending elsewhere, that tell people and the markets we're going to take deficits seriously, even if we can't give you a hard and fast plan right now.
All right, so Mark, look, he's going to outline a plan here to cut the deficit from 1.3 to 1.9 trillion down to what they're predicting right now is $533 billion. How does he do that?
Well, what he does is he proposes spending cuts, which are the reductions from our costs in Iraq, and what he does is proposes tax increases. What concerns me is not the tax increases per se, but the impact they will have on the economy. Because the real answer to dealing with our deficit is not spending or tax increases per se, it's economic growth. And I'm concerned that some of the tax increases he's talking about will inhibit economic growth.
Jerry, look, the jury is still out. We just passed the stimulus package. We just did this housing announcement just the other day. There's more announcements, as you know, down the line here. How much will the markets and D.C. read into what he's saying, given the fact that we don't know what else is going to be used in the tool shed over the next year or two?
Well, it'll be interesting to see whether the president talks about the possibility of another stimulus or another TARP package. In other words, is he going to lay that on the table and tell people, realistically, I recognize that we may not be at the end of this road of government stimulus or government bailouts, and so you ought to take that into consideration. I think what he can say, though, is, as Mark indicated, there's some broad outlines here to their approach. A lot of the savings are going to come from winding down the war in Iraq. I mean, that's a big part of the cost savings that are going to be projected in the president's budget plan. And a big part of the revenue increase comes from letting the Bush tax cuts expire in a couple of years. And so you'll get the broad outlines. I just don't think you're going to get the kind of detail that people might like. Now, it's worth remembering April is when the real budget comes out, and we'll see a little more detail then.
Mark, it's going to be a hard thing to sell to the American people. We're putting all this taxpayer money at risk. We're borrowing from the Chinese and the Japanese. And oh, by the way, at the end of the day, your taxes are going to go higher. I mean, look, everybody would like the deficit to be cut in half by the end of his first administration, but he's got to make some unrealistic promises that are going to make a lot of people pretty angry. How does he handle that?
Well, I think he ought to do something that he hasn't done so far and really talk about taxes. Taxes can be fair, they can be unfair, they can be good for the economy, they can be bad for the economy. Let me give you an example. He's talking about increasing the tax on capital gains. He's talking about increasing the tax on dividends. Because one of the things he's trying to do is get the wealthy to pay more. Why, instead of increasing the taxes on saving and investment, why don't we move to a consumption tax? If you want to get wealthy people to pay more, why don't you get them to pay on what they spend, buying yachts, buying fancy Park Avenue apartments? If you do that, you'll get more capital available for new entrepreneurs and for businesses, large and small, that need capital. That would be pro-growth. That would be a shift in tax policy. That's something I think the average American would understand and could appreciate more than just hitting small businesses, which some of the proposals would do.
All right, well, Mark and Jerry, we're going to leave it there. I'm sure all these tax issues will be very hotly debated this week. Gentlemen, thanks so much. Great seeing you this morning. All right, well.